Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Weekly Hope. It's Kirsten and my unofficial co-host Elsa here to welcome you to one of our couple holiday episodes. It's officially holiday season for those of you in the United States. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. If you're wondering, I live over here in Europe, and I did have the chance to celebrate American Thanksgiving with some American friends and some European friends as well, who just happen to love the holiday and enjoy eating a turkey. And so I did get a chance to celebrate, and it was really, truly wonderful. But we're so glad to have you here as a part of this Facebook Live this week. We're going to talk about a really, really great topic, and we have an excellent, amazing guest who's right there on the other side of the screen, that way, who I'll introduce in a moment. But for those of you who might just be finding this on your feed, or those of you who haven't been back in a while, maybe some of you tune in every week, to you, welcome back. But I just want to start out by telling you a little bit about what this show is all about. So here at Weekly Hope, we welcome guests from across the field of mental health and eating disorder expertise, clinicians, authors, people with their own recovery stories, nonprofit leaders, advocates, to come on and talk about a different topic we tackle just about every week. And we are aiming to educate, to give you resources, point you to resources, and just create a space where you can be and ask questions. And, you know, I personally have my own recovery journey. I've shared many times on this show, and I just wish that I had the opportunity to hear from experts during my recovery, and also the opportunity to ask them good questions. So one of the great things about being able to offer this show on Facebook is that it gives you an opportunity to be a part of that conversation. So I just want to encourage you to pop in, say hello. The really cool thing about this show also is that we get people signing in from all over the world. And so say hello, tell us where you're coming from, where you're signing in from today, your name, if you feel comfortable with that. And the other thing I just want to tell you about sharing is what's so cool to see, and this just even happened last week, when we get people who share their experiences at a doctor's office or in treatment or something that was really meaningful to them in their recovery, other people always reply and say, that was so helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Or that's been my experience too. What did you do in this situation? And so the comment section actually can be really, really cool. And you never know that you might be sharing something that might be incredibly helpful and life-saving to someone else. So just want to put that out there if you feel so compelled. And if not, just say hi, because we always love to see your names and to have you be a part of this conversation. So that's a little bit about what we do here at Weekly Hope. And I am going to introduce our guest, and we're going to dive into our topic for today. So we are very, very happy to have Emmy Johnson with us. Emmy is an MSW LCSWA. Her pronouns are they, them. And they are a white, non-binary, queer therapist specializing in eating disorders. They work from an anti-racist, health at every size, trauma-informed, anti-oppression framework, and strive to be open, understanding, and welcoming to all. In their free time, you can find them hiking with their dog and reading Harry Potter for the 20-something time. So, Emmy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and you are joining us today from North Carolina. And you are at Carolina House, which is there in Durham. So to begin, tell us a little bit about your role at Carolina House and what your day looks like.
Yeah, so I'm a therapist. I do individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy, as well as, you know, some case management and then various other duties as assigned, as it says, sort of whatever's needed. I split my time between our gender-inclusive residential treatment house called The Estate and our day treatment programs, PHP, IOP, out in Raleigh.
Gotcha, wonderful. And I always love to hear from clinicians, what first got you interested in this field? What is your passion that drove you to get into mental health work?
Yeah, so I started out volunteering at a rape crisis center in college, and then moved from there knowing that I wanted to be a therapist and focus on sort of trauma work, particularly with LGBTQ populations. I when I was in graduate school, I knew that I needed to do an internship around either eating disorders or substance use, just because those issues are so prevalent in LGBTQ populations, particularly around trauma. And I got this internship here at Carolina House and absolutely fell in love with this work, the patients, my coworkers, and I find eating disorder work really, really interesting and empowering, and I couldn't have ended up in a better place.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure that Carolina House feels very, very glad to have you because there's been a real shift and a real growth in the last several years about the mental health field generally, but especially the eating disorder community, really making sure that they address eating disorders in marginalized communities in ways that they have been neglected before. So you were talking today specifically about transgender, non-binary and LGBTQ issues, particularly how that community is affected. But there may be some people who are watching this later on YouTube who aren't quite familiar with what those terms exactly mean because they get tossed around in the media a lot. But if someone doesn't know someone or they don't know that they know someone, let's just start with some definitions. So what is the definition of transgender?
So transgender is an adjective used to describe anyone whose gender does not consistently align with the gender they were assigned at birth. So, you know, someone's born, the doctor said, it's a girl, and later they say, no, or I'm a boy, or sometimes, but sometimes not, or any other number of experiences. But the idea is the doctor said it's a girl, and at some point they said, I don't think so.
Yeah. And can you just briefly, as an addendum to that, describe the difference between sex and gender?
Sure. Yeah. So sex, generally, we're looking at body parts, and it's made up of, you know, our chromosomes, our hormones, and then the genitalia and secondary sex characteristics that we might have, like body hair or breasts, something like that. Whereas gender, we're talking more about someone's internal experience and how they're viewed by the world. So it can get really complicated because people can alter their sex, right? People can alter their bodies. People can take hormones to change their hormone composition. People can have surgeries to change their the way their body looks. And then, of course, gender is something that's ever evolving and has to do with an interplay between the individual and the society, how they're experienced by the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that I didn't think of that originally, but I think that's a good thing to describe because I think sometimes people don't know the difference between those two. Okay, moving on to non-binary. What exactly does that mean? And it can be used in a lot of different contexts. So what does it mean specifically in this context?
Yeah, so when we talk about the gender binary, we're talking about the Western framework that says that there are two genders, there's men and there's women, or there's male and there's female. And non-binary is any person who identifies with a different gender or with multiple genders. Any identity that says, no, actually, man and woman, neither of those work for me.
Okay. And LGBTQ, or also I've seen LGBTQIA as well. So can you go through and explain what all those letters stand for?
Yep, so L is lesbian, so a woman or a feminine person who primarily is interested in women or feminine people. G is gay, which usually men, but any person who is primarily attracted to people of their same gender. B, bisexual, people who are interested in people of two or more genders. Transgender, we just talked about. Q can be queer, which is kind of an umbrella term for anyone whose sexual orientation is not straight, and is a term to be careful with because in the past in particular, it's been a really derogatory term, but it has been reclaimed by a lot of people. Q can also stand for questioning, just saying not everyone knows for sure, and we welcome those who aren't certain into our community as well. I, when you see that, is intersex, so someone whose body doesn't align into our usual notions of male or female. A is asexual or aromantic, someone who maybe doesn't experience sexual desire or romantic desire. You might see a 2, which is for Two-Spirit, which is Native American folks who are part of that community. And you might see a P, pansexual, people who are attracted to people of all genders. There's a lot of different terms because we're a pretty big community with a lot of different wonderful people in it.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for going through and explaining all those things, just so people have the lowdown and they understand.
Yes.
We all need to be more educated, so we can start from there.
Mhm.
So how common are eating disorders in this field? And I know that we've seen an uptick, but at the same time, that could be just because people are more comfortable talking about it. So how common is the problem of eating disorders in the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, so we don't really have sufficient research is one of the difficulties, but it does seem to be higher rates than in our straight cisgender populations. One study that I've seen of college students found that 15% of the transgender college students had been diagnosed with an eating disorder in comparison to 1 to 4% of the cisgender participants. So that's, 4 to 8 times more prevalent of eating disorders. And then, yeah, I think you highlight a great point that we are talking about it more, which is fantastic and might mean that it looks like the prevalence is going up when actually it might mean that we're just talking about it in ways that are really appropriate and people are able to get access to the care that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the ways that eating disorders in this community are different, but also the same. First of all, how might someone who is in this community and their struggle with an eating disorder be different than, say, a white cisgender person?
Yeah, so transgender people with eating disorders, one of the ways they might be different is that it's possible that they're using their eating disorder to modify their body without hormones or surgery, particularly if they don't have access to hormones or surgery for whatever reason. They might be saying, well, if I lose weight, then I won't get my period. And having my period is really upsetting to me as a transgender person. And so I don't want to have my period. And so I'm going to use my eating disorder to get rid of that. So things like that can be one way that there might be a difference. I do want to note that at least in one study, about a third of the transgender respondents said that they used their eating disorder in that way, whereas more than half said that it had nothing to do with their bodies. Sometimes can get into a place of saying, well, transgender people, we're going to assume it's all about their bodies. But I mean, as we'll talk about in a moment, there's more similarities than there are differences. The other difference I really want to highlight is that we might have higher rates of suicide, suicidality. We know that trans people in general have much higher rates of suicide, and most terrifying statistic I've ever seen in one study of transgender people with eating disorders, 75% of the respondents had attempted suicide within the last year.
Gosh.
Which is really, really high, right? And very frightening and much higher than transgender people without eating disorders and much higher than people with eating disorders who are not transgender. And so that's something to be on the lookout for, right? If you have a loved one who's transgender and has an eating disorder, maybe checking in a little bit more frequently, right? There also might be slightly more complicated relationships to the body. We know that in general, I don't encourage that eating disorder treatment focus on like a love your body approach because that can be really difficult for anyone, anyone with an eating disorder, right? But that might be even more complicated for transgender people who might say, actually, like I have good reason to not want my body to look the way that it does. And so it might be a little bit more complicated.
So it's so fascinating. That 75% statistic though is just horrifying.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So moving away from how they're different, how are they the same? Because so many things that you just said too, especially when it comes to the relationship with the body, it seems like there might be some commonality there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I honestly think that for the most part, it's very similar. Trans people with eating disorders generally have eating disorders for the same kinds of reasons that cisgender people have eating disorders. It might be a way to manage emotions, particularly unwanted emotions. It might be a way to cope with trauma. It might be, a way to have a sense of control, all the same reasons that cisgender people might have eating disorders. And the reason that it might be more prevalent for LGBTQ people, and particularly transgender people, might be that transgender people, LGBTQ people, have generally experienced more trauma on average than gender people. And so that might contribute to the higher prevalence. Treatment looks very similar, right? We're still looking at stabilizing eating routines. We're still looking at finding other appropriate coping mechanisms. We're still looking at examining where the eating disorder came from, what role it's serving, and trying to sort of untangle that. So treatment's really quite similar. And I mean, as you were pointing out, like the body interaction, right? The whole love your body message may not work for anyone with an eating disorder. And so we try to focus where I work on messages of like, okay, you may not love your body and you need to take care of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to reach goals that you have, transition related goals or not, other goals, you need your body to be working. It's the only option we have here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so good. It's interesting because I read there was an article several years ago when Caitlyn Jenner was transitioning, and it talked about that process through the lens of someone who had struggled with body dysmorphic disorder, and which is different but has relations to eating disorders. It can turn into an eating disorder, et cetera. And it was like I finally understood because it was because it related to the relationship with the body and acceptance and yet change and just this whole idea of identity. And I was like, oh my gosh, now I understand. And I was able to kind of step into the shoes, for example, of someone whose experience I had obviously never had before. So it was really, really fascinating. But can you describe also what body dysmorphic disorder is too, so people can know? Because I think also there's a community of people out there who also think that this is just body dysmorphic disorder when it's something totally different.
Yeah, so body dysmorphic disorder is not something that I specialize in, but basically it has to do with really a lot of focus on some kind of perceived flaw in the body, right? It usually shows up with like one single body part. And it can look like an obsession, right? It looks in some ways kind of similar to OCD. With sort of obsessions and then some compulsions to help moderate the anxiety of the obsession. And so it can be this sort of over focus on a body part. One metaphor I've heard about it is it's like looking into a shattered mirror, right? Where you're not seeing yourself in sort of the appropriate, the way other people are seeing you, but you're looking, your nose is in one of the full pieces of mirror and everything else is sort of shattered and you can't see it, something like that.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a really helpful image. We've got a question in here from Phoenix, and I'd like to bring Phoenix in. Hi, Kirsten. My question is how to heal if there's a lot of shame because of being gay, because of a non-accepting family and bullying in teenage years. Even though it's 25 years on, I still have my eating disorder, Phoenix. So yeah, shame and bullying.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emmy, go ahead.
And that's something we see, all over any kind of person who has an eating disorder. Shame and bullying are such common experiences and can be particularly reinforced for LGBTQ folks. Phoenix, I really appreciate your question. I think that a lot of it's going to be a lot of work around self-acceptance and a lot of work around finding your communities, right? It's really hard to find that self-acceptance when you continue to be surrounded by people who think that it's wrong to be gay, right? And so really working towards finding your voice, finding your own sense of self, and coming to terms with the fact that you're gay and that's okay, right? And that can be a really wonderful, beautiful thing about you that can bring you all sorts of, it's not just neutral, right? It can be a really positive thing to be gay. There's going to be experiences that you're going to have because you're gay that you wouldn't have had if you're straight that are going to be beautiful and wonderful. And so really working through that shame and working through, towards some acceptance is really going to be, I think really helpful for you. And of course, I always recommend finding a really, really affirming team, you know, a therapist who can help you work through this, a dietitian who's on board, right? Like folks who are really also going to celebrate the fact that you're gay with you.
Yeah, wonderful words. Thank you, Emmy. And thank you,
Mhm.
Phoenix. It's great to see you here again.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the importance of the treatment team, I mean, it's exactly what you're doing is so, so key. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. Um, so what are some of the biggest, and that actually kind of leads to a question that I think is really important to address too.
Mhm.
Is how do people in this community, maybe if they're watching now, or like I said later, advocate for themselves, not only
Mhm.
within their family, like Phoenix just mentioned, but with their treatment team or within the medical community, their doctor. What tips can you give people? What can they say? Like just very practically applicable. What can they say to their doctor? Because sometimes
Yeah.
it's like people think, well, maybe I should say this or that, but like they don't have the advantage of having a professional sit down and tell them, yeah, say that.
Yeah.
What would you tell them to say? How can they advocate for themselves?
Yeah. And so it's really going to depend on, you know, what the provider's like. I always encourage people to find providers who already are pretty educated, if you can, right? If that's available in your area, ways to find those providers might be to ask around online or go to your local LGBTQ center if there is one, see if you can find recommendations from other folks. If finding people who are already educated isn't possible, finding people who are really open to learning and will do their homework, right? Because you can go in and say, oh, I found this article that I'd like you to read, or I'd really like you to read this book. And then even more than that, really, if you are willing to, and if you are able to, because it's not your responsibility, right? I want to really emphasize that it is the provider's responsibility to educate themselves and be able to provide for you. And we live in a world where sometimes that doesn't happen. And in order to get the care that you need to advocate for yourself. And so the more you can come in armed with facts, with articles, with books, that can often help a lot. And then also refocusing your provider onto what you need to talk about, right? If your provider's asking inappropriate questions or wants to spend a whole bunch of time, you know, talking about your body when you're like, actually, what I want to talk about today is my mom, right? Redirecting, being like, we're not talking about that right now, trying to set those boundaries. And also really want to validate for everyone out there who doesn't have an affirming provider, like that's really tough and that shouldn't be happening. And I'm so sorry.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, don't be afraid to educate and also I think it can be really positive too. You said find your community and um,
Mhm.
there are a lot of people that are seeking treatment, seeking help in rural communities or places where they just don't have an educated provider, someone who has
Yeah.
any experience with this community or eating disorders in general. And so there are a lot of Facebook groups, online communities where you can get support that just a mere Google search can lead you to, or I'm sure that, Emmy, you probably know of some more organizations
Yeah.
that I do to point people to where you can get connected to communities online that too also can direct you to resources.
Mhm.
But just utilize, I can poo-poo social media all day long, but also it's a great place to offer resources. So, Emmy, actually, do you have any organizational recommendations where people can go online for support?
Yeah. So I'm completely blanking on the name. Oh, TFED. Trans Folks Fighting Eating Disorders is a great organization. And then, I should have prepared.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I totally didn't prepare to
Yeah, yeah.
ask this
No,
question, but
no
it just popped
worries.
in my head.
No
I think
worries.
it's so good.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's a great
I'm going to
question.
look up that website, though, and I'm going to put it here in the comments so that
Mhm.
people
Yeah.
TFED.
Mhm. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then yeah, general sort of body positivity kinds of groups. Yeah, I'm gonna come up with a list and I'm gonna send it to you.
Yeah, please do. That'd be great.
Yeah.
And then also the National Eating Disorders Association,
Yes.
just also, they've partnered with the Binge Eating Disorders Association as well as the Men's Eating Disorders Association, and they are very, very supportive of the LGBTQ community as well, and they do a lot of programming around that as well. So that's another great resource. But get connected to that online support community.
Yeah.
So what are the ways that you've seen the treatment world get better in addressing these issues for this group?
Yeah, so I'm relatively new to the field. I've only hopped into this field in the last 2 years. But based on what I've seen, just the general awareness in our whole society has led to a lot of providers knowing more and being more open to learning and having more resources to learn from, which is really exciting. The estate where I work is a relatively new gender inclusive treatment center, and we've seen a lot of folks through that and a lot of other programs really look to it and start to want to model after it. Talk to a lot of providers who, again, are really interested in learning and are really recognizing that this is a population that they need to be educated on and need to be ready to treat, because like it or not, they're going to see transgender patients. I like it, but I don't know if they do. Right. And so they need to be prepared and need to be ready. And so I've seen more openness towards that. Yeah.
That's good. There's reason for hope.
Yes, absolutely.
So speaking of providing some hope, the two things that and we're coming toward the end, so if anyone has any other questions that they want to ask, now would be the time to do so, or if you just want to pop in and say hi, we always love that. What advice would you give a parent or a loved one? What advice would you give them for someone who's trying to support someone in their recovery?
Yeah. So most important for transgender folks is to respect their identity, right? Use their pronouns, use the name that they're asking you to use, support their access to transition, even during treatment. Some people are like, oh, we need to treat the eating disorder first. No, you can go ahead with transition as is, appropriate. It costs nothing to get a haircut, right? Well, it costs $30 or whatever, but the hair grows back if you don't like it, right? You can get some new clothes. You can try out different names. Your body might need to be stronger before surgery becomes an option, but anything that is appropriate for your body, you can go ahead and do. And so family members supporting that transition and being really on board is really, really important. And then more generally, the same kinds of things that you would do for a cisgender family member who's going through treatment, making sure to be there, validating their experience, both how difficult it is and saying that you believe in them and their ability to do this. Really focusing on showing up, right? Show up for the family sessions, show up by learning, show up by listening and adhering to their boundaries and kind of focusing on what they'd like to do. Make it, honestly, when possible, make it kind of a family togetherness activity, which I know can sound a little odd, but your loved one is learning all sorts of things in treatment. So learn from them, like get excited, be like, what are you learning? I want to learn too. You're learning all these things about DBT skills or nutrition, right? I want to learn that too, so that I can do it. And really being there as someone who wants to go on this journey with that loved one can be a really fantastic way to support.
It's so great. I love that, making it fun. What are you learning? I seriously think, I think everyone needs therapy. I think everyone should go learn CBT and DBT and all of this stuff, because there's so many people out there you come across in the world, I'm sure you do too, that you need therapy. You need a good experiential.
And on that note, family members, get your own therapist as well. This is going to be hard on you, and it's going to be easier if you have someone who can help walk you through it, who can, who's someone who you can go to process your feelings about it that may not be appropriate to share with your loved ones. Same deal with if you're if you're having feelings about your loved one being transgender, that's fine. Feelings happen, totally normal, particularly in our society that isn't really about transgender people. Those are all feelings that happen. Go to a therapist, process with them so that you can show up for your loved one in all the ways that are appropriate.
Oh, it's so good. And therapy isn't like you need to be fixed. It's like you need support too. You know,
Yeah.
you need a place to process, you need support too.
Mhm.
And then last question is, if someone is watching this right now, and you gave such wonderful, encouraging words to Phoenix earlier, but if someone is watching this later and they're in a really dark spot, how would you encourage them?
I mostly want to just let them know that it is super legit for things to be super hard. That happens, and like you're a fighter. Like LGBTQ folks, we're so resilient. We come from a long line of people fighting really hard for all of our lives to be better. And just by existing, you make this world a better place. And so I hope that you can hang on. I hope that you can keep working towards survival, towards recovery, towards showing this world all the amazing things that you can be, because you deserve it. You deserve to exist. You deserve pleasure and love and support. And I'm so glad you're here.
Awesome. Thank you, Emmy, so much.
Mm-hmm.
Really a delight to have you on. And we're so glad for all of you that are watching. And just, yeah, we're so glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad
Yeah.
to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So cool. Well, thank all of you for watching. Thank you, Emmy, for being here. And just want to reiterate what I always do at the end of every episode, and that is that if you found this content helpful to you, to please share it. You know, because you never know who's out there and might really, really need to hear it right now. So please share this video. It'll be on our YouTube channel, on the Eating Disorder Hope YouTube channel in a few days, maybe even before that. So you can share it from there or from our Facebook page. And eatingdisorderhope.com obviously has tons of articles, resources, blogs, videos, etc. If you'd like to check out more, you're interested in learning more about how you can pursue recovery or you can support a loved one who is on that journey. But either way, we just want you to know that we are here for you. And we hope that you found this inspirational in some way and that you go out there enjoying the holiday season and knowing that you're not alone, you're worth it, you're valuable. And we are all very thankful for you. So without further ado, Elsa and I are going to say ciao. It was a joy to have you. We'll see you next Tuesday, December 11th, for another episode of Weekly Hope. So stay tuned to our social media channels to hear more about that. But we wish you a very wonderful week, and we'll see you next time. All right. Bye, everyone.